Welcome back to Fusty Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Rita Patrick grew up in Manchester, the daughter of hard-working immigrants who owned a modest bookstore on the city's outskirts. From an early age, she displayed a mind sharper than most of her peers, preferring books on finance and leadership over teenage gossip. Her parents, though not wealthy, instilled in her the values of independence and resilience. By the age of 22, Rita had already begun building small investments under a quiet name, nurturing a dream of running her own empire without anyone knowing. She was stunning with her Nigerian dark complexion, tall and graceful, often underestimated because of her soft-spoken nature. Yet beneath that calm exterior was a woman who had mapped out her life with precision, carefully planning every step that would one day place her in the halls of power. But Rita wasn't just about money. She carried scars of loneliness. She had lost her mother to cancer at 17 and her father 2 years later, forcing her into a world where she learned that affection was fragile and survival required strategy. Though men admired her beauty, her guarded heart kept them away. She longed for companionship, but feared betrayal more than she feared failure. When she finally crossed paths with Samuel Johnson, a charming and ambitious man from London, she thought fate had sent her someone who saw beyond her wealth. What she didn't realize was that Samuel's ambitions ran deeper than his supposed love, and his hunger for recognition would eventually drive both of them into a storm that would shake their worlds. Samuel Johnson was the kind of man who turned heads the moment he entered a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile that concealed his cunning, he had always relied on his charisma to open doors. Born into a struggling family, Samuel grew up watching his father work endless shifts at the docks and his mother take on laundry jobs just to feed them. The bitterness of poverty carved into him a silent vow. He would never live small. His childhood friends remembered him as the one who would stand in front of mirrors, practicing speeches as if addressing shareholders of a company he didn't yet own. That hunger for status became his obsession, and when he met Rita Patrick, he saw in her the perfect combination of beauty and opportunity. On the surface, Samuel presented himself as hard-working and disciplined, often speaking of the nights he stayed up planning his future. He was enrolled in business courses, always networking, always reaching for connections. What Rita didn't know was that his achievements were inflated stories, carefully crafted to impress. Samuel believed love should serve ambition, and though he courted Rita with flowers, long walks, and poetic promises, behind his smile was a man already calculating what life with her would bring him. To Samuel, Rita was a trophy, a jewel that could both elevate his status and open doors into circles he could never enter alone. His charm masked his greed, and while Rita thought she was giving her heart to a man who understood her pain, Samuel was quietly scheming how her world could become his playground. Anita Benjamin, with her striking dark eyes and alluring confidence, was the kind of woman who thrived on deception. Born in Bristol, she had been raised in a broken household where lies were as common as meals. Her father was a gambler who disappeared when she was 10, leaving her mother to drown in debt and frustration. Anita grew up learning that the world rewarded manipulation far more than honesty. By the age of 16, she was running small scams on the streets, deceiving tourists with fake jewelry schemes. With each con, her skills sharpened and her ambitions grew. She didn't want survival anymore. She wanted dominance, luxury, and control. Anita's beauty was her greatest weapon. Her curves and bold smile disarmed men, while her quick wit gave her an aura of sophistication. She moved from one city to another, never staying long enough for her lies to catch up with her. By the time she met Samuel Johnson, she had already left behind 2 men bankrupt and broken. She saw Samuel as her equal, someone driven not by love but by ambition and greed. To her, Rita was an obstacle, an inconvenience standing in the way of the life she wanted. And unlike Samuel, Anita had no shame in playing dirty. Where Samuel still pretended at decency, Anita was the embodiment of hunger without conscience. Their paths crossing set the stage for a betrayal so calculated, it would leave Rita questioning everything she ever believed about love. The wedding of Samuel Johnson and Rita Patrick was nothing short of dazzling. Held at a grand London hall with chandeliers glittering above and a sea of elegantly dressed guests, the event seemed like a fairy tale. Rita, in her flowing white gown, appeared radiant, though her quiet eyes carried a vulnerability few noticed. Samuel played his part to perfection, smiling at guests, whispering sweet nothings to his bride, and promising her a life of shared dreams. Everyone thought they were the perfect couple, a union of beauty and ambition destined for greatness. Samuel's friends clapped him on the back with envy, whispering about how he had landed one of the most admired women in the city. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Samuel relished the spotlight, enjoying the whispers about how lucky he was. But in his heart, he didn't feel lucky, he felt entitled. To him, marrying Rita wasn't about partnership. It was about possession. Meanwhile, Rita was torn between hope and unease. She loved Samuel deeply, or at least a version of him he showed her, yet her instincts sometimes whispered warnings. She brushed them aside, choosing to believe in their vows. Little did she know, even on their wedding night, Samuel was already texting Anita, weaving lies about Rita being cold and detached, planting the seeds of a secret affair that would one day shatter her world. Unknown to Samuel, Rita was far from the helpless bride he thought she was. For years, she had carefully built her fortune under discreet names, creating shell companies, trusts, and private investments. Her parents' bookstore had been her first venture into business, and from there she had expanded into publishing, real estate, and eventually technology. By the time she was 29, Rita secretly controlled one of the largest private holding companies in Europe. But she lived modestly, dressing simply, avoiding extravagant displays of wealth. She wanted a love that was pure, not bought. Her decision to keep her empire hidden was intentional. She wanted Samuel to prove himself, to show that he could build alongside her without depending on her fortune. Ironically, she even arranged for Samuel to secure a position at her company, disguising it as an opportunity from his hard work. Rita watched quietly as he boasted about his achievements, never revealing that she was a hand guiding his career. To her, this was a test of character, one he was slowly failing. Samuel's arrogance grew, his gratitude shrank, and the man she married was beginning to show his true colors. Still, Rita remained silent, determined to protect her heart and her empire until the day the truth could no longer be hidden. At the company, Samuel quickly carved out a reputation as an ambitious and aggressive executive. He thrived in meetings, impressing colleagues with his confidence and bold ideas. Yet, what no one realized was that most of his opportunities were quietly handed to him by Rita. Promotions came swiftly, his salary grew, and he basked in the illusion that he was self-made. Samuel loved the respect he received, the whispers about how he was destined for CEO. He began to treat Rita differently, no longer as a partner, but as someone who should be grateful for his success. But power has a way of feeding the worst parts of man. Samuel began hosting late-night gatherings with colleagues, enjoying expensive dinners, and surrounded himself with people who fed his ego. He was careful enough to maintain appearances at first, but soon the arrogance seeped into his home. Rita noticed the late nights, the dismissive tone, the way he flaunted his job title, as if she had nothing to do with it. Samuel convinced himself that Rita needed him more than he needed her. In his mind, she was replaceable, someone who should remain in the background while he soared. His growing relationship with Anita only reinforced his delusion, as she constantly whispered in his ear that he deserved better, richer, and more thrilling than the quiet woman he had at home. Anita Benjamin knew exactly how to feed Samuel's ego. She draped herself in charm and seduction, praising him in ways Rita never would. She convinced him that his brilliance was being wasted, that he deserved to live like royalty, and that Rita's quiet nature was holding him back. In Anita's arms, Samuel felt unstoppable like a king. She fueled his arrogance with flattery and promises of wild adventures, feeding his appetite for excitement. Slowly, Samuel began to resent Rita, seeing her humility as weakness rather than strength. Anita's manipulations were precise. She whispered lies about Rita being unfaithful, hinted that Rita didn't truly believe in his vision, and constantly compared herself to the wife he had at home. Samuel, blinded by his own ambition, began to believe her. Nights grew longer, excuses became weaker, and his betrayal deepened. What neither Samuel nor Anita realized was that Rita was watching, listening, and quietly gathering every piece of evidence. Her silence was not ignorance. It was strategy. While Samuel thought he was winning, Rita was merely waiting for the perfect moment to turn his world upside down. Rita began to feel the distance growing like a cold shadow in their home. Samuel no longer spoke to her with tenderness. His words were clipped, dismissive, sometimes outright cruel. He accused her of not supporting his ambitions enough, ignoring the sacrifices she had made for his career. Dinner conversations turned into arguments, and nights were filled with silence. Rita, though deeply hurt, maintained her composure, refusing to let him see her break. She poured her energy into her secret empire, building stronger alliances and securing assets under her name. The loneliness weighed heavily on her. Friends began to notice the strain, asking questions she brushed off with forced smiles. Samuel flaunted Anita at private parties, disguising her as a business associate. But the whispers in social circles grew louder. Rita endured the humiliation quietly, her pride forbidding her from begging for his affection. But in her heart, a storm was brewing. She knew Samuel was testing her limits, pushing her patience, and underestimating the woman he had married. Every insult, every betrayal, every lie was becoming fuel for a reckoning he never saw coming. By now, Samuel had grown bold in his arrogance. He stopped hiding his disdain for Rita, belittling her in public, sometimes even mocking her in front of his colleagues. He believed she was dependent on him, financially and emotionally, and he reveled in that imagined control. At Anita's urging, Samuel decided to cut off Rita's debit card, convinced it would bring her crawling back to him in desperation. In his mind, Rita was powerless without him, unable to survive in a lavish lifestyle he claimed to provide. He timed his move carefully, waiting for the day when Rita was scheduled to attend a charity gala. He imagined the humiliation she would face when her car was declined in public, forcing her to call him in shame. That night, he toasted with Anita, laughing about how his wife would finally be put in her place. Samuel was blind to the reality that every string he thought he was pulling was attached to a puppet master he couldn't see. His cruelty wasn't breaking Rita. It was only sealing his downfall. The moment came at the charity gala. Rita, elegant in a flowing emerald gown, stepped to the counter to finalize a donation. Samuel's plan was in motion. Her debit card was blocked, and he was certain the embarrassment would crush her pride. He waited for the phone call, grinning as he pictured her humiliation. But 5 minutes later, instead of crawling back, Rita calmly pulled out another card, her private account card tied to her hidden billions. The transaction cleared instantly, shocking Samuel, who was nearby with Anita, watching from the shadows. Gasps filled the hall as Rita not only completed the donation, but doubled it, her confidence radiating like fire. Samuel froze, his smirk evaporating as realization crept in. The woman he thought was helpless had just shown strength he couldn't fathom. The whispers in the room shifted. People now spoke of Rita as a woman of power, not a dependent wife. Samuel's humiliation was swift and brutal, and Anita's grip on his arm tightened as she realized they had underestimated their prey. Rita turned, her eyes meeting Samuel's across the room, calm and unreadable. In that moment, the balance of power shifted forever, and Samuel's world began to crumble. The gala ended with whispers chasing Samuel like shadows. Rita walked gracefully through the hall, shaking hands with CEOs, mayors, and high-profile guests who now viewed her as a formidable woman of influence. Samuel, humiliated and shaken, tried to regain his composure, but Anita's nervousness exposed his defeat further. Rita didn't confront him directly. Instead, she allowed silence to become her weapon. The absence of reaction unsettled Samuel more than anger would have. At home, Rita carried on with calm dignity, preparing breakfast the next morning as if nothing had happened. Her composure left Samuel restless, unable to predict her next move. That night, Rita retreated to her private study. The walls, lined with ledgers, contracts, and confidential files, told the story of her hidden empire. She ran her fingers across the documents with a serene smile, knowing the time had come to stop hiding. For years she had protected Samuel from the truth, but now she saw no reason to guard his ego. The world believed she was a dependent wife. Soon they would learn she was a force behind the empire Samuel thought he was climbing. The question wasn't if she would expose him. It was when. and Rita intended to make it devastating. Samuel returned to the office expecting pity or at least confusion from colleagues, but instead, he was met with strange smiles and whispered conversations. News of Rita's extravagant donation had spread, and though no one connected her to the company's ownership yet, Samuel sensed a shift. His confidence wavered. He tried to assert himself in board meetings, but his usual arrogance sounded hollow. When he returned home, Anita pressed him to demand answers from Rita, but pride held him back. He couldn't bear to confront her and risk hearing truths that might expose his dependency. Desperation began to creep in. Samuel increased his spending, buying expensive watches, designer suits, and cars he couldn't afford, hoping to maintain the illusion of success. Anita cheered him on, promising that their new life would be free of Rita's shadow, but even she began to question his control. Samuel grew paranoid, wondering if his colleagues respected him for his work or merely tolerated him because of Rita. His marriage was already fractured, but now his career, his pride, was beginning to feel unstable. Yet Samuel refused to admit defeat. Instead, he clung to the illusion of control, unaware that every decision he made was only tightening the noose Rita had patiently set. While Samuel's arrogance spiraled, Rita quietly solidified her circle of allies. At the gala, she had caught the attention of Daniel Cole, a billionaire philanthropist with a reputation for exposing corruption. Daniel admired Rita's humility and intelligence, recognizing the quiet strength she carried. Over the next weeks, they shared private meetings, not romantic at first, but strategic, discussing business ventures, philanthropic goals, and eventually Samuel's behavior. Daniel encouraged her to reveal her power, not for revenge, but for justice and freedom. Rita also confided in her trusted assistant, Claire Matthews, who had managed her hidden empire for years. Claire, fiercely loyal, prepared reports that compiled evidence of Samuel's recklessness. Together, they devised a plan, slowly disentangle Rita's influence from Samuel's career until he stood naked before the world. It wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about teaching him and Anita that betrayal carried consequences. Rita's allies weren't many, but they were precise, powerful, and determined. While Samuel believed he was surrounded by admirers, Rita had already filled the chessboard with her pieces. Anita Benjamin grew restless. She had invested time and effort into Samuel, but the more she watched Rita, the more she realized she was facing an opponent far more dangerous than she imagined. Still, greed blinded her. Anita began scheming ways to secure Samuel's assets for herself. She convinced him to transfer her funds into joint accounts under the pretense of planning their future. Samuel, too arrogant to see her manipulation, complied. Slowly, Anita siphoned money into offshore accounts, her exit strategy forming quietly behind his back. Her ambition stretched further. She wanted to tarnish Rita's image. She spread rumors in small circles, painting Rita as manipulative, cold, and controlling. But instead of damaging Rita, the lies exposed Anita's jealousy. People began to notice the difference between Rita's composed dignity and Anita's restless hunger. Anita underestimated one thing: Rita's ability to turn even slander into strength. Every attempt Anita made only deepened the contrast between mistress and wife, between power built on deception and power built on resilience. Anita was playing checkers. Rita was playing chess. The moment came during a board meeting. Samuel, emboldened by Anita, walked into the room and tried to assert dominance over senior executives. He belittled colleagues, bragged about his strategies, and dismissed concerns about company losses his reckless spending had caused. Then, mid-speech, Rita entered. The room fell silent. Samuel froze, unsure why his wife was suddenly present in such a professional setting. Rita, calm and poised, announced herself not as Samuel's wife, but as the company's majority owner and chairwoman. The revelation hit the room like thunder. Executives exchanged stunned glances. Samuel's face turned pale, and Anita, waiting outside, sensed something had shifted. Rita didn't gloat or raise her voice. She simply presented facts, financial records showing Samuel's mismanagement, evidence of his arrogance, and a statement of her authority. Samuel stammered, trying to claim he was blindsided, but his words fell flat. For years, he believed he was a rising star. Now, in front of his colleagues, He learned he had been nothing more than an employee under his wife's silent reign. The humiliation was unbearable, and for the first time, Samuel realized he was standing on a crumbling empire that was never his. After the confrontation, Samuel's reputation shattered. Colleagues avoided him, executives ignored his directives, and whispers of his incompetence spread across the industry. He stormed home, furious at Rita for betraying him, but she met his anger with chilling calm. She reminded him of every insult, every betrayal, every night he spent with Anita while she silently endured. Samuel lashed out, but his words were powerless against her truth. Their marriage, already fractured, collapsed completely that night. Anita grew distant as Samuel's downfall accelerated. She no longer saw him as her golden ticket, but as a sinking ship. Samuel begged her to stay, promising riches and power, but Anita had already begun preparing her escape. Samuel, desperate and isolated, clung harder to her, blind to the fact that she was the one slowly draining his accounts. Rita, meanwhile, focused not on revenge but on rebuilding herself publicly, stepping into her role as the powerful woman she had always been, no longer hiding behind the shadows of her husband's ambition. The betrayal Samuel never saw coming arrived quietly. One morning, he woke to discover his accounts nearly empty. Anita had vanished, leaving only a short note. "You gave me everything I needed. Goodbye." His luxury cars were repossessed, his expensive suits unpaid, and debt collectors began circling. Samuel's arrogance crumbled into despair. He realized Anita was never his partner, only a predator who had used his greed as her weapon. The humiliation of losing Anita hurt almost as much as losing Rita. He had traded a loyal, powerful wife for a mistress who abandoned him the moment his wealth evaporated. Samuel spiraled into depression, wandering the streets of London in suits he could no longer afford, drinking heavily and begging old friends for loans. The man who once demanded admiration now faced ridicule. His empire of lies had collapsed, leaving him exposed, penniless, and broken. Rita, watching from afar, felt no triumph, only closure. With Samuel gone and Anita vanished, Rita stepped fully into her new chapter. She no longer hid her empire, openly declaring her ownership and becoming a respected figure in Europe's business circles. Interviews hailed her as the quiet billionaire who had lived in humility before revealing her true power. Women admired her strength, men respected her strategy, and society embraced her as a symbol of resilience. She turned her pain into purpose, launching Foundation for Women Betrayed in Relationships, offering them resources to rebuild their lives. Daniel Cole became a close companion during this rebirth. Their bond, once strategic, blossomed into something deeper. Daniel admired her courage, and Rita found in him the understanding and respect Samuel never gave her. Though cautious, she allowed herself to feel hope again, realizing that love built on mutual respect was far different from love built on ambition. Rita was no longer the silent wife. She was a woman who rose from betrayal to triumph. Samuel's final humiliation came when he returned to the company, begging for reinstatement. Security refused him entry. He caused a scene, shouting about his years of service. But the world had already moved on. Reporters captured the meltdown, splashing his downfall across tabloids. Former colleagues avoided his calls, and family members distanced themselves from the scandal. Samuel Johnson, once the man who believed he owned the world, was now a cautionary tale of arrogance and betrayal. Rita didn't interfere. She didn't need revenge. The world had delivered it for her. Watching Samuel crumble was no longer her concern. He had made his choices, and those choices had destroyed him. For the first time in years, Rita felt peace. Samuel, broken and forgotten, faded into the background of a story that was no longer his. Rita had reclaimed her narrative, and she was determined never to let anyone write it for her again. The sun rose over London, casting a golden glow over Rita's penthouse. She stood by the window, holding a cup of tea, reflecting on the storm she had survived. Beside her, Daniel joined her quietly, their silence carrying comfort rather than tension. Rita smiled softly, no longer the woman defined by a husband's betrayal, but a woman who had turned her pain into power. Her new life wasn't just about wealth. It was about purpose, dignity, and freedom. The world now knew Rita Patrick not as Samuel's wife, but as Rita, the billionaire, the visionary, the survivor. She had endured deception, betrayal, and humiliation, but she emerged stronger than ever. Samuel's story ended in shadows, Anita's in disappearance, but Rita's was a beginning. A new chapter awaited, filled with love, respect, and the promise of brighter days. For every woman who had ever been underestimated, Rita became a symbol. You can be broken, but you can also rise. And she had risen higher than anyone imagined. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.